It is 1 o'clock, and we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Jessica Enix, and I'm with the ACIL staff. I would like to welcome you to today's ACIL webinar, Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, Becoming the Best Leader of Them All. Before we begin, I'd like to review a few points of protocol so that you'll get the most out of your webinar experience. Remember, you are listening to the webinar via a conference service. If you are disconnected, repeat the steps that were given to you by the GoToMeeting email. In order to reduce background noise, please be aware that all participant lines are muted throughout the webinar until the Q&A section at the end. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, you may type them in the chat box, and the presenter will respond to questions at the end of the presentation. Please note today's program is being recorded. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Mr. Rick Parmley. Rick Parmley is the founder of Polished and Professional LLC, a training company that specializes in improving communications of groups as diverse as individual investigators or groups of trainers. After teaching undergraduate chemistry at West Point and Juniata College, Rick joined Res Tech Corporation in 1997 and until recently directed their technical education program. He teaches chemistry and separation science theory through Res Tech Learning Network. With 30-plus years of teaching experience, Rick has taught science and communications courses to widely diverse audiences, including NATO officials, technicians at the UN Pesticides Laboratory in Austria, and scientists at the University of Nairobi. Rick also offers on-site training to individuals, small groups, and leadership-level teams in leadership and fostering communication throughout organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Rick Parmley.
Hello, everyone. We'd like to welcome you and thank you for attending this afternoon. This opening illustration really is the basis for better leadership when we think about it. If you recall, Brothers Grimm had a story entitled Sneewittchen in 1812. That story became known as Snow White. That's what that means in German. What did the evil stepmother ask of her mirror? You might recall she said, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" We may ask ourselves a similar question. Who is the best leader of them all? How could I reach a goal of being the best leader in my organization? And perhaps we're saying to ourselves, I don't need to be the best. Well, your direct reports and your colleagues probably would differ with that statement. We need to optimize our leadership and communication skills if we're going to reach our full potential. So we at times look at ourselves in different light than others see us. So how do you see yourself? As a great leader, good manager? Maybe you need some improvement. We all have probably thought that from time to time. So we may even have what I term a distorted leadership reflection. We look in our mirror, our personal mirror, and we see someone different. This particular person may be very prideful or have a narcissistic tendency that whatever they say is the only way, not just the right way. We also may look at ourselves in a distorted image, and in that illustration we may say, well, I envy other leadership and other managers within the organization because of their abilities. What if you had some flaws? Could someone point them out to you without you getting all bent out of shape? And frankly, we all have flaws, and our leadership ability is somewhat reflective of how well colleagues and direct reports approach us and call those flaws to our attention. Our managers are very quick to point out the flaws we have, but will a colleague come and honestly have a discussion with you, or are they afraid to do that? The real question is, when you look in the mirror, who is the real you? At times, our direct reports may wonder the same. They may say, well, I'm seeing one person one time and one person another time. Can we measure ourselves in some way? Well, we'd like to present a concept of great leadership, and we're only going to look at 5 facets of that. There have been many others developed. Maxwell, Jim Collins, many others have developed concepts of different leadership. But we're going to look at 5 individual concepts. Having a vision is one. So what is our vision for the organization, our group, or ourselves personally? We'll talk about that. Number 2, are we a trust builder in the organization? By the way, that's Nick Walenda crossing the Niagara Falls. To prepare for the event, that's interesting. He came to trust his balance and that wire that he's on by stringing a similar wire across the parking lot in a Niagara Falls casino 11 straight days before he had to walk the Niagara Falls. And he had fire trucks spray him with water, and they brought in some fans to blow a bunch of wind at him so he could develop trust in his own ability to cross the Niagara Falls under very difficult circumstances. That's kind of what we need to do. We need to practice our leadership and develop and cultivate trust with people within the organization. Do we have the stamina to be a great leader? We'll discuss that a little bit. This illustration is of Diogenes, Euripides, who basically thought that he could run from one end of Greece to the other, and Philippides did make it, but it was where the term marathon comes from, as the Persians were invading Greece and had a much superior army. The Greeks set up a new way of fighting, but called on their Spartan neighbors for assistance. Well, Philippides ran all the way to get help from Sparta to face the Persian army, and then ran back with bad news. They weren't getting any. And after the decisive victory at Marathon, he ran back to Athens, as you see in this illustration, to report victory, some 25 miles, and that's where the name marathon race comes from. Well, as a leader, can we finish the race? Do we have enough strength and stamina to continue? Now, Diogenes, if you know the illustration, it's Diogenes looking for an honest man. So one of the qualities of leadership is to be honest, not only with ourselves and our abilities and what we're trying to accomplish, but most importantly with those around us, our colleagues, not managing up and being somewhat dishonest with our managers, or even more importantly, dishonest with our direct reports. So Diogenes said that there were no honest men, and he was one who, we'll find out later in the presentation, had attacked many about their honesty. And then finally, love. The question here is, do we have to have a love fest to be successful as a leader? Well, frankly, no. It doesn't have to be any kind of hugging or that kind of thing, although we have a tendency in business to steer away from having any physical contact, even touching anyone on the arm, but we're okay with, in this country, with handshakes. But there could be a little bit more warmth within our relationship with others, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So a leader, a great leader, has a vision for himself and the organization. He is a trust builder. He has significant stamina, because many things will jump up from time to time that may cause him to need extra energy. He has to be honest with the organization, and he has to demonstrate a warmth or a love for people around him. So let's examine each one of those in turn. First of all, the vision. What vision means is probably difficult for many of us to define, so we're going to look at what other people have said. Ralph Lauren said, a leader has a vision and conviction. So vision is connected with conviction that a dream can be achieved. He inspires, notice, the vision drives inspiration. He inspires the power and energy to get it done. Do we have a similar vision? Or do we just address things as they come up in our day-to-day life? Or do we promote a vision? Jonathan Swift said, vision is the art of seeing the invisible. Well, vision for us is looking out a number of years and saying, this is where I want to be in that period of time. And again, we go back to having a personal vision first, where do I want to be in 5 years, 10 years? Where do I want to be at retirement? That could run all the way from my financial situation to where I want to take my team or organization. Then, where is the organization now, and where do I want them to be in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? That's developing a vision. Famous GE CEO Jack Welch said, a good leader remains focused, and basically focused on a vision, allowing it, as he said in the second part of this quote, controlling your direction is better than being controlled by it. So sometimes these visions that we dream up for our organizations are really designed to push the organization forward financially, but that seems to be the only driver for the organization. Did we hit our numbers this month? A good vision also comes with actions and a list of things we want to accomplish by a certain amount of time. Do we want to be the best at customer service by whenever, 2020? Do we want to have a certain number of customers who are raving fans of ours by a certain time? Do we want to have so many repeat customers based on our ability to contact them? What does our vision say, and what does it mean for the organization? And most importantly, how achievable is it? Most of us at times wonder, if we have a vision, is it something just on a plaque somewhere on a wall like in a conference center, or is that vision more readily available where people can know it and live it from day to day? So how do we communicate that vision? And one way that we suggest is communicate it by storytelling. Storytelling has been used thousands of years to project and present very complex concepts to people that report to us, and people that are in parallel organizations to us, and to our shareholders, and to our board of directors. So storytelling is an excellent way to communicate vision. So how does it work? Well, number one, meditate deeply on what your vision is going to be. Where do I want to go and why? Think about it regularly, each week. What is my vision? How do I see the future? Where do we need to go? How do we need to get there? What does success look like in achieving that vision? Then define the vision in terms of your role. Where do you fit in that vision? Your team's role, your company's role, the whole industry's role, and make sure the vision is, as we'd say, tight. It has no loose ends. We know exactly. It's very clear. Then capture your vision in a story form that can be easily communicated. Essentially, communicate it in writing, first of all. Write it down. Publish it to the organization formally. If you can't write your vision, then likely it isn't very tight. There are a lot of loose ends. Then communicate it in person. If you're the one that's projecting the vision on a portion or the entire organization, you should be able to stand up and defend it orally at all levels of the organization. This is where the question and answer allows you to defend it against objections. And then once you understand what those objections are, as a leader, you can address them. You can communicate it by your own actions, your own example. And really, the best leadership is leadership by example. You're a key player in this, especially when you look in the mirror and ask yourself if I'm communicating vision appropriately for the organization. So that's number one, vision. Number two is being a trust builder. You see here, people that rappel or climb, they depend a lot not only on the rope, but on the harness that they wear. Those things are essential to survival. And to do that, we need to have some trust in our equipment. John C. Maxwell, famous guru of leadership, said, trust is the foundation of leadership. Stephen R. M. Covey said, trust changes everything. So when trusting our equipment, such as a harness, rope, carabiners, that's fundamental to achieving the goal of good climbing. What's also fundamental in leadership is developing trust, and we have to develop trust in an organization. So I guess to figure out what it is to figure out what it's not. So let's talk about that a minute. The moment there is suspicion about a person's motives, Mahatma Gandhi said, everything he does becomes tainted. In other words, it's not believable. So suspicion is, if you suspect something is wrong, you probably don't trust it. If your rope was frayed as you put it on your shoulder to go rappelling off of a 100-foot cliff, you likely would say, I don't trust it. Well, if you suspect someone's motive, either a direct report or a superior or a colleague, you might not trust them because you have suspicion about their motive. So credibility is involved. Now, credibility is related to believability. Am I credible in what I say and what I do? Or am I inconsistent in my behavior? One time I do something this way, the next time under a similar circumstance, I take the opposite approach. That's not credible, and it's not consistent. Another thing that trust is having a good reputation. Having a poor reputation, whether it's in the community, within the organization, legally, trying to shave edges when they're not honestly done that way, that develops a poor reputation within the organization. So let's talk a little bit about how we can communicate trust to the organization. Some things that we could do and not do. So number one, tell the truth. Use simple, direct words. Call a spade a spade. Sometimes it's not good enough to say that we're not making our numbers this month. If we say we're close and we're off $100,000, in some organizations that might be fine. In other organizations that would be catastrophic. So say it exactly the way it is. Demonstrate integrity in the things that we say and do, and people will trust us more. Some things to avoid: telling half-truths or leaving false impressions. False impressions are really easy to leave because we just tell half the story and people are left to their own to draw their own conclusions. That's a half-truth, and it doesn't build trust. Distort the facts or the data. Perhaps you've heard that, oh, we just missed our sales numbers this month, and our quality, though, is way up. When our quality grew 1% and we missed our numbers by 10%. That's a big difference. It distorts the facts and the data. How about spin? Spin is an interesting term because spin came from the 1984 Mondale-Reagan debates. That word was invented at that time. The word spin implies that there is untruth behind what we're communicating. We don't want to create spin within the organization and cause concern or alarm by what we're presenting. So in reality, spin is not a good thing, even though it might make for a good story or make for a very inconsistent message, but spin is not good in the organization. And then manipulating people in teams, we've seen that from leadership, trying to get people to do things that they really are not capable or willing to do, and saying that we will manipulate the team is also a trust destroyer. Okay, number 3. Let's talk about stamina and endurance. You might recognize this as Kenenisa Bekele. Bekele was a famous Ethiopian long-distance runner, and he holds the Olympic record in both the 5,000 and 10,000 meter events. He won the 2008 Summer Olympics in those events, but he won many other races because of his stamina and endurance. And we talked about that runner, Philippides, at the beginning. Bekele's the same. Putting your nose to the grindstone and being able to push through something that is almost an insurmountable object in front of us. It takes endurance. So Merriam-Webster provided this definition of endurance: the ability to withstand hardship or adversity, especially so the ability to sustain a prolonged stressful effort or activity, like a marathon runner's endurance. So do we have the endurance as a leader to push through hardship, adversity, prolonged stressful effort or activity? We may find our day-to-day activity is what we would call a prolonged stressful activity. Our direct reports may feel the same as we make an assignment. So how do you communicate that you have endurance and you can get things done? Well, part of it is breaking it down based on physical activity. Whether we're training for a marathon or chasing a toddler around the house, there's plenty of reasons out there as a leader to want stamina as well. First thing you can do is reduce resistance and recovery. That's one way to build stamina if you're a distance runner. So we limit our recovery time between each of our exercises, kick it up a notch. What can we do in the leadership area? Well, take some weight off the day and do more things that day. In other words, building stamina. So you might start the day with a half an hour meditative period of what you're going to get accomplished that day, and say, are some of these big stressful things needed today, or can I get a few small things done first, thus seeing that I have the stamina to get through the day. Number two, be balanced. Many times leaders get themselves in trouble, especially verbally, when they're tired, and they say things that later on they regret that they had said. They don't think clearly before they say something. So get some rest, be balanced. Some of us may need 8 hours a day of sleep. Others may need 9, 10. Some may need 4, 5, or 6. In any event, be balanced in how much rest you do get. Don't be running all week and then think that you can also run on the weekend all weekend and then start running again the next week. Eventually, it will catch up with you. So those are the first two. What about increase the intensity and repetitions? Remember, to build up a steady pace, you want to increase your stamina and increase your intensity. Whether you're running, rowing, biking, or doing anything like that, whatever you do, you know you've increased the intensity when you're out of breath, and you feel that burn sensation. So perhaps for us as leaders, we should feel the burn earlier in the week and taper off toward the end of the week. Ratchet it up early in the week when we've rested at least a little over the weekend. And by rest, it might be a round of golf. It might be some time with your significant other, if you have children, whatever, but just get your mind off business. And then early in the week, as we say, hit the ground running and be prepared to go early and quickly into your normal routine. Ratchet it up to build intensity toward the beginning of the week. And then finally, here's the big thing for distance runners: push through it. It's mind over matter. That's a good way to build endurance and stamina. One runner said, our minds are the key to either pushing our bodies or stopping short. So get your mind on the solution. How can I accomplish this goal for the organization that is essential? And to do so, I need to have stamina to push through it and push my organization through it. All right, so that's stamina or endurance, the third segment of our leadership puzzle. Number 4, honesty. Was Diogenes correct? The cynic Diogenes, was he correct? You remember Diogenes was notorious for his stunts of carrying a lamp in the daylight, claiming to be looking for an honest man. He criticized and embarrassed Plato. He disputed the interpretations of Socrates and sabotaged his lectures from time to time. It was even said that he publicly mocked Alexander the Great and survived. Diogenes was an odd character, but he has a good point. Are we honest? When we look in the mirror, are we really what we are in reality? Are we projecting that same image in the organization? Or are we one person at home and a different person at work? Really, the honest person is the same. His wife and children, or husband and children, feel the same way at home as the direct reports and colleagues do at work. We attempt not to insulate our personality from what we're doing at work. You're more of a real person. You're honest in your approach. Does that mean that you shouldn't be firm in some cases? Absolutely. But you're probably pretty firm in some things that happen at home, like excess of budget, purchases that don't make any sense, children that go outside boundaries or moral boundaries within the family. You'd be firm. Well, you're firm at work as well, so you're being honest. Honesty is, and what is it is not. What we say is true and forthcoming, not just technically correct, according to Michael Dell at Dell Incorporated. So how do we communicate? Honestly, both to our colleagues, our direct reports, and those who are giving us work, whether it's the board of directors and shareholders, or whether it's someone in our chain of command. Are we honest and forthright all the time? And how can we communicate that? Well, here's some steps. Number one, listen. When we're sitting there trying to develop a rapport, an honest rapport with someone, we have to listen to what they have to say and not be defensive. So once we hear a statement, we might ask a question or questions and say to them, well, could you amplify this point a little? Or how did that work out for you? Can you tell me a little more about it so I want to fully understand that? This exchange of listening, asking questions, and then listening for the response not only honors the person and builds trust, but it demonstrates that you're an honest person. So now you may commend them and say, thank you for bringing this to my attention. Why is that so important? Well, it's important because at your level, whatever level that is in management or leadership, you really want to commend the person for having the courage to come and tell you that. That shows that you're an honest person. But it doesn't work out if you don't fully understand it and if you don't take action. So the fifth step is to fully clarify what the truth is, either provide an explanation or take action to correct it. In all of this, it may be that you don't really know what the outcome's going to be, but you have confidence that it's going to be fine. We call that mindful of reality, and in his book, Good to Get Great, Jim Collins called it the Stockdale paradox. Admiral Stockdale, he was a Navy pilot, won the Congressional Medal of Honor, 6.5 years in the Hanoi Hilton. After getting out, and some years later, Jim Collins, for his book, interviewed Admiral Jim Stockdale, and he asked him the question about who didn't make it out of the Hanoi Hilton, out of the concentration camps that the North Vietnamese at that time had. And Stockdale replied, he said, oh, that's easy. The optimists didn't make it out. They were the ones that said, well, we're going to get out by Christmas, and Christmas came and went. And then they'd say, well, we're going to make it out by Easter. I know someone's going to come and help us get out of this mess. We're going to win the war by then. Easter would come and go, then Thanksgiving, then another Christmas, then another Easter. And they generally, according to Stockdale, died of a broken heart. So what's the Stockdale paradox? It's this. You must never confuse faith, Stockdale said, that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, that faith, with the discipline to confront the most brutal facts of your current reality, whatever that might be. In other words, as leaders, we always need to have the confidence and faith that our vision is going to be successful, but we also need to have the discipline to confront the brutal facts of your current reality. Stockdale's current reality, he had to cut himself with any kind of razor or sharp object, hit himself with any object he could get in his cell, like a stool, in order not to be interviewed by the enemy at the time and prevent a propaganda video from being made that would show that he was compromised his integrity. He did those physical things in order to protect himself from the reality, the current reality, that he was going to be in there a while. But he never lost his faith that eventually right would prevail. And in the end, that's something none of us as a leader can lose. So read Jim Collins' book, Good to Great. The Stockdale Paradox is laid out much better than I probably explained it. Number 5, love covers a multitude of challenges, and then the question is hugging really necessary? Well, maybe not, but it doesn't hurt either. In the business setting, sometimes we're too stiff and formal, in my opinion, when really we're dealing with people and they need to see the warmth that a leader can provide. So the question is, what is an appropriate level? What is love of people? Well, let's talk about that a minute. Really, first step is empathy, the ability to identify with the pain of others. In other words, your pain in my heart. Not an accusing, you're a pain, but the pain that all of us have experienced in going to work from time to time. Maybe it was we're getting to the end of a particular career path. Maybe we're not functioning in the role that we were assigned and we experienced a loss or hardship. Empathy is the ability of the leader to identify with the pain of other people. Now, what can we do about it is the question. Really, that's the most important part of it. And is there value to it? And if you don't feel that there's value to empathizing with people, I argue it'll be difficult for you to be a leader of the level that you need to be in order to be successful within your organization. So how do we display love for people? Well, first of all, by commendation. Commend for what is done right. And is capitalized there to show that our commendation of what is done is more important than what is not done. So commend them for that. Number 2, we can show love for people and empathy with their circumstance by listening. Now, it almost appears that the person here in the background is listening, sort of tilting their head toward the individual with a question that sort of like, let me make sure I get this correct. Are you saying that? And talking through those things not only builds trust within the organization, but it also shows that you're interested in people, that you have a love for people. We can also display love for people by reward, and that's the first thing that comes to people's minds. Direct reports specifically, if they're an entry-level person or they've been in the organization for a couple of decades, maybe some of them, and they're looking for reward, but honoring them with our words is also a good way. You've made a valuable contribution. Think of the last time that you said that to one of your direct reports or one of your key managers. You've gone to them and you said, you make a valuable contribution in the organization. I just want to commend you for that. Or asking their opinion and listening. Or asking their opinion and rewarding them with a bonus, or appropriately after a performance evaluation that went very well. How are you going to reward them and show love for people? If we can commend people each day on what they do and let them know that they're valuable to the organization, things will go much better in the long run and our leadership image will soar. And we might think about that image a minute. Ask yourself, is your mirror reflecting you, or is it reflecting what you think you are? And in that way, we might have a different approach. If we get a different reality when we look in the mirror as opposed to what others see, we have some work to do. Warren Bennis said, leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. So what is our present reality? And how do we know? Is our team vulnerable in the present situation? How do we know that? How would we determine that? Well, I'd like to give you 5 things you can look for, and there are probably more, but in my experience, these 5 things are crucial. Number 1, a lack of open communications. Now, that lack of open communications means, how are our team meetings going? How do people in our team meeting react when we come into the room? Are they silent? Is there a warmth among our team, or is it kind of tense? Open communications is just critical for the organization to achieve the objective and vision that is set before them. Number 2, being passive-aggressive. Passive aggression could be in the form of many things, but this is one that I've observed. So your team gets together, you have a critical decision to make, you all make a decision, and you look around the room and you say, okay, from what I'm hearing, this is the direction we should go. Is that true? The room falls silent. That's number 1, lack of open communications. What's worse is when you leave the room and everyone says that they can support the vision, even though they haven't commented, out in the hallway, they grabbed the first available person that wasn't in the room with you making this decision and said, boy, we just got together and our management team made a crazy decision. I've never seen such a dumb decision in my entire life. That's passive aggression. That also shows that the team's in trouble and you need to do something about it. Number 3, open criticism. Well, Rick wanted to make this decision today, and we went along with it. I don't think it's going to work, and here are the following 10 reasons I think it's going to fail, and he should have seen this. I didn't have to tell him that. That's open criticism. If that's in your organization or your team that you're responsible for, you'll need to do something about that. A work slowdown. Many times that happens in organizations that are organized as labor and as management. So a work slowdown could happen to you. It could happen in a variety of ways. If you're a testing industry and you're responsible, your economics are based on throughput, you might see work slow down as samples get tested at longer and longer intervals. And then just a general lack of enthusiasm about coming to work. Hey, how you doing, Sally? Oh, I'm beat. Well, it's nice to see you. Yeah, whatever. And they wave and go off to work. That's just a total lack of enthusiasm. So that's the current reality of my team. That my team is probably vulnerable, and we have to ask ourselves, if my team is trending this way, I might not be able to reverse engines in this case before I hit the stop that it's going to face me very soon. So the question is, when we look at reversing engines and doing something before we hit dead stop. Now, dead stop might be inability to pay our invoices, inability to pay staff, the need to lay off workers because we need to save so much in a budget. Those could be dead stops where the organization is just at the edge of the end of the tracks, but they're not quite there. We can see it coming. So what do we do? Well, here are some steps that we found very effective to reverse that trend. Number 1, meet frequently. Now the question is, what does that mean and what is it going to accomplish? Well, meet frequently means understanding what the game afoot is and play it fairly. In other words, you could have a situation where 2 people on your team are not getting along. You understand what the game is. They've got some personal issue. How do you play that game fairly? Ignore it? I would recommend that you bring those 2 people into a room and get them talking, and talking to you about what beef they have with one another. Play that game fairly. Once you have that discussion, you might say, okay, let me give you a little bit of feedback on what I see is going on here, and talk them through that. There's nothing wrong with addressing the issue head on, especially if it affects the organization and the accomplishment of your vision. Then as you're giving that positive feedback, what you're doing is reflecting your true interest in the situation, and you're not hiding anything. If you ignore an ongoing cancer in your organization, it will only spread. So you have to address it. And it shows interest in people that are around these two that are having difficulties. What if it's two of your key managers and they're always fighting behind the scenes about things? It will eventually spill over to the organization and cause a breakdown in the tight organization that you're trying to build. So nothing hidden, reflect your interest, give positive feedback. It's not a session where you're trying to be overly critical. You're just trying to evaluate and help them see what their options are in terms of fixing the situation. So meet frequently. I had a circumstance once in management where I came into a fairly dysfunctional organization, and in reality, I didn't know what I was going to do. But one thing I knew I was going to do is listen to what people wanted to talk about. So instead of having infrequent group meetings, we had a group meeting every week. In fact, what I did within the organization is I provided refreshment each week, and most of them in that organization appreciated that in time, and they volunteered to bring refreshments to the weekly group meeting. And in time, everyone started talking about options to solve the problem. So when they start talking, that's step 2, listen. Listen with your eyes, ears, and heart. Stephen R.M. Covey says that if you listen with your eyes, ears, and heart, you'll understand the true intent of the message. And that's what we're trying to accomplish, really. During that time, ask thoughtful questions. Why did you do that? How did that work out for you when you did that? How effective was your course of action? Ask questions, not in a sarcastic way. It's how you pose that question that has its biggest impact. Seek to understand each of the people involved and not to condemn them. Then number 3, once you get that feedback, take appropriate action. Things like, that's a great suggestion, I'll give that some thought, is appropriate action, because not all suggestions are bad, but some can't be acted upon. So you have to have some way of acknowledging that that suggestion was a good one and what you're going to do about it. Acknowledge the ones that you know you'll not take action on. That's a great suggestion. I'll give it some thought. I'm not sure I can make that happen today. And if you add that word today, it at least provides hope. But the reality is, hope is, a pretty thin word, especially as time goes on. So regroup about that suggestion, but always be willing to take feedback and execute quickly, give feedback quickly, so you don't have the next thing develop. Follow up with dissidents. Are we going to have dissidents within our organization? Yes. Every organization has a dissident. So why do you follow up with them? Well, principally, it's the Edwin Stanton, Secretary of War during Lincoln situation. Edwin Stanton was a big believer in freeing the slaves. Why? Well, because he believed that slaves should be freed and armed, which would help the Union Army. Lincoln at the time was apprehensive about freeing the slaves and arming them, and that argument between him and Stanton continued for months. Stanton was the dissident in this case, but it didn't prevent Stanton from continuing to make arguments. And he even garnered support from some of the generals within the Union Army. The point is this: your dissident might be correct. In the final analysis, abolitionists hailed Lincoln's proclamation, and they credited Stanton with the president's change of heart. So Stanton was definitely a dissident, but we want to remember they can contribute tremendously to the vision of the organization, as they did in the case of Lincoln. All right, number 5, always find something to commend. That might be a challenge. It may be And as you see here, there may be a needle in that haystack somewhere that may be difficult for you to find it, but that's what we need to do as leaders. We need to say to ourselves, I'm going to find this needle in the haystack. There is something good that can come out of this. There's something good from this dissident. There's something good from my current situation. In all cases, we want to look for something that we can find to commend. How can common ground be found? Well, look for something that you have overlapping interests, ways that both of you can accomplish what you want to accomplish. The dissident may want something done, and you may find that that's not offensive to the vision, so you have common ground. Shake hands on it, make an agreement, but find something to commend the person. In reality, we're kind of where we are. If you look at this image closely, here's a person who looks in the mirror, and it's kind of like, yeah, this is me. I'm kind of good, aren't I? Well, but when you think about it, that's pretty prevalent in leadership today in organizations. So let's put a banner across the lower part of the screen, and it says, it's all right to have a good opinion of yourself, but we Americans are so smug with cockiness, we somehow feel that we're good just because we are Americans. We can whip our weight in wildcats, Ernie Pyle said. Well, if you take that hand off the bottom of the screen, that image doesn't look so offensive now, does it? It just looks like a confident person looking in the mirror. We want to have that confidence as leaders so that we can accomplish our goals and our objectives. With that said, I think we're going to save some time now for some questions that may have come in. If you can provide those questions, I'll be glad to address them as Jessica has them.
Does anyone have any questions? If you do, please type them in the chat box and we will address them.
Okay.
There are not any questions at this point. Does anyone have any questions?
Let me just say that it's been a pleasure speaking to you today, and as you can see my contact information there, we do a lot of consulting on-site with folks, and if you have a thought or a question about the material we talked about, or you'd just like to talk about further aspects of good communications within the organization or leadership, please reach out to me either by phone or by email, which is there on the screen, and I'll be happy to address those.
Well, thank you so much, Rick, for your presentation, and if no one has any final questions, thank you all for your participation, and we look forward to joining us for our next ACIL webinar, September 20th. Okay, thank you all. Thank you, Rick.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.